Welcome everybody to the TMF reference model meeting. It's lovely to speak to you all. I'm here from the UK. My name is Karen Roy. I'm the co-chair of the steering committee, or chair of the steering committee. And the UK is very sunny and warm and beautiful at the moment. So I'm hoping that where you are, it's warm and sunny and beautiful too. So lovely to see everybody on. I can see the chat, so if anybody wants to message, feel free. I'm hoping for today to be quite interactive, so we're going to fly through a few bits and then have a couple of presentations and then do some panel discussions. So looking for you guys to be asking questions, etc. So update on membership, update on initiatives, very quick update, and then we're going to launch into our virtual inspections. A couple of presentations and then panel for Q&A. We've had a great number of people that have emailed in, sent in comments. If you want to come on and either speak up or you want to put your video on, or equally, if all you want to do is just stick something in the chat, feel free. So very relaxed from that perspective. So where are we today since the last meeting? We've currently got 340 people as project team members. We've got 1,163 subscribers, and our LinkedIn group, which just keeps growing, is 3,158. So a lot of places that you can join and get information about the TMF reference model. If you go to tmfrefmodel.com/join, that's where you can see all the information about joining the TMF reference model. So lovely to have so many people who are being part of our TMF community. So TMF, those of you who don't know, I'm sure you've heard it by now, too much fun. So let's talk about the initiatives first of all. So I put at the top a screenshot of the website, and you can see that we've got 2 new initiatives that have been released. For those of you who weren't on the last call, or maybe you joined late, or maybe you didn't hear it, we've had the Real World Studies Document Index, which has been released, and we've also had the Electronics Communication Guidance being released. Both on the website, both free to download. Hopefully everybody who wants them can go and get them and use them as much as you want. In terms of the new initiatives, well, there's the sub-artifacts initiative is currently with the Change Control Board for the next version. We will be talking about the next version on the next meeting, so that will probably be devoted to that on the next meeting. But that's come back. The sub-artifacts group is coming to a close. We've also got the devices, which is being finalised. These are the sub-artifacts and artifacts for devices. And then from an exchange mechanism perspective, again, we'll be talking about that a bit more on the October meeting. But for those of you, if anybody wants to know anything further about the exchange mechanism, just email me and I can put you in touch with the right people. We are also going to be looking for new initiatives. So there's a few things that have come up on the survey this year, etc. So we're going to be looking at things. So we're always open to ideas. Just remember that we focus on the TMF reference model content and the actual model itself, not just general TMF management stuff. Okay, so that was the quickest introduction I've ever done because we got lots to cover today. So virtual inspections. And before we start, I'd like to do a little poll. There's 108 of you on the call, so I'm hoping that 108 of you can go in and answer the questions. A couple of basic questions. In other words, what organization are you from and where are you based? Because I always think it's quite interesting to see sort of the geographic spread. And then, and hopefully you have to answer all the questions. Have you been part of a virtual inspection? And which agency was involved in your virtual inspection? Just a quick comment. Thank you very much from Henry to say they've used the RWE document index and very happy with it. So that's fantastic news. Anybody else that's used either of the new documents, post it up and let us know. Okie dokes. So 71 of you have voted. So I'm going to see if I can get it to like about 90, because that would be really good. 75. There's 112 people on the call. Of course, there may be people who have phoned in and logged in. So if you do that, then sorry, Sarah, you've just made me laugh that it was you, not Henry, your son. And Jane, virtual inspections from agencies. Well, actually, I guess that's a good question. I was talking about virtual inspections from agencies, but we are going to be definitely covering off, Jane, we're definitely going to be covering off agencies, virtual inspections, mock virtual inspections when we get to the panel. So, okie dokes. Hey, got to 90. How about that? Fantastic. 91. I'm going to end the polling now, guys. But there's 92 people that have voted. So here's the polling, and I'm going to share the results with you. If somebody wouldn't mind, please taking a, actually, no, that's a bad idea. So Aaron, I think you're on. Can you take a screenshot and send it to me? Otherwise, I'm going to have like everybody emailing me the screenshot. Are you on, Aaron?
Yep, Karen, just hold on 1 second.
Okay. So 50% of you from sponsors, no sites, no regulators, no others. Okie dokes. 79% from North America. I just find it fascinating that there's always so many more people from North or South America that are on this rather than Europe. I understand Asia because that is, oh, and there's 2 Europe, sorry about that. I understand Asia because obviously time zone's a bit out. Virtual inspection, 14% of you have been part of virtual inspection, so that's some good experience. And we're talking about MHRA, FDA, EMA, PMDA, and other. So can somebody, whoever wrote other, that's 4, can you put in the chat, if you wouldn't mind, please, what the others were? Because I think it will be useful to understand what the other pieces were. And Aaron, Jamie's, mock, thanks, Wendy. Jamie has got a screenshot, so I don't know whether you have as well, but it's fine. Thank you very much, as long as I've got 1 screenshot to put in the slides. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing the results. And I am going to ask, first of all, I'm going to hand over to Lisa, just to do oh, no, before I do that, I got an answer from Andy Fisher on a couple of questions, so I've fed them in here as well. So one of the questions that we asked Andy Fisher, and those of you who don't know Andy Fisher, he is the MHRA regulator who really likes TMFs, or talks a lot about TMFs. And I asked him, will virtual inspections continue? And as of the September blog, and here's the links here as well, they're starting to do on-site inspections, but they'll continue to make use of remote inspections where it's appropriate. But of course, who knows what is going to be happening in terms of rules. They're changing the rules in the UK as we speak, so it may go back to remote. Oh, and thank you, Loretta. Sorry, I realized I didn't, one of the others was that, but we have the Chinese FDA from Zali, so thank you very much, and mock inspections. Okay, so having said that, I'm now going to hand over to Lisa. So Lisa, can I hand over to you? I'll drive the slides if you wouldn't mind, and just let me know when you want me to go from slide to slide, just to give us some sort of baseline considerations about preparing for remote inspections.
Sure. Hey, do you hear me right now?
Oops, yeah,
can you hear me?
Yep, absolutely, no problem at all. Go
okay.
For it.
Okay. Which, if you would go forward. So I gave a presentation last week at the Clinical Documentation World, and these are just a few of the slides that we're going to go through. So is the concept of remote inspections new? No, it's not. So way back in 2012, when eTMF systems were starting to be consistently implemented, well, the health authorities, especially UK and EU, were seeing the value of or the possible value of being able to access the TMF remotely. And they could see it before, during, and after. So even in the evenings. So some of the reasons were because we are growing with the comfort of eTMF systems. It was no longer a decentralized or geo-dispersed TMF, and it wasn't paper. So if I could access it via the web, why can't I access it from my home, you know, or my office? And this is a plug for the TMF reference model, but I really believe that the consistent TMF taxonomy and architecture that was provided by the TMF reference model allowed the comfort to grow because there was not any of that unique sponsor-specific TMF architecture. There was a growing comfort to go directly into sponsor systems, which is very strange because they were, you know, in the beginning, the inspectors were uncomfortable going directly into systems. But as EDC was remote and going directly in and taking a look at the data, the inspectors were growing more and more comfortable with going into going into a sponsor's eTMF, especially as the inspector role in the system was developing and was being able to kind of be limited or restricted. And then honestly, I think this is it. I think the value of doing the work remotely was also pairing well with reducing budgets to travel around the world to conduct these inspections. So this just tied nicely in with why can't we use the resources that we have and not spend the travel and maybe spend less time on site. Next. So I presented all these topics, but I'm just going to jump in here for a couple of the topics. So I'm going to start with just giving information around starting with a plan and translate that plan to process, and then planning for the inspector's access and system support. So if you would go on. So you can start with a plan of a lot of different ways. Honestly, some people might do it by Excel spreadsheets or tables. I'm with a client right now that is doing it by a table. Seems inefficient, but that's the way they're doing it, and that's fine. That's fine. I actually think that starting right from the very beginning to get all this information and all these thoughts underneath, you should start with a spider diagram or a mind map, because you're going to have a ton of thoughts and things are going to build. So Karen, if you would just build this slide, 5 more clicks. So these are the ways that you can start, and I'm going to tell you probably are going to have 20 of these different little side ideas. But for example, if we go down to the meeting technologies, well, you're going to talk about, well, do we use Zoom? Well, what if we have a backup, and who's going to support that? And what kind of Wi-Fi, what kind of browser is needed for it? So you have all these other sub-ideas associated with what is needed to conduct the inspection when it is remote. And I'm not going to tell you that you have to start over. I actually would go to if you have already developed plans or processes associated with with the conduct of your inspection, I would actually start going with that. Go to your big highlighted sections and start thinking about how each of those different sub-processes are impacted by it being remote. And then you're going to come up with new ones. So for example, you might say, oh, well, when it's an on-site inspection, we provide the inspector with our computer. So that's hardware. It's not even on here. So hardware, well, what do you do when the inspector's using their own hardware? What do you do when the inspector needs to be able to view SaaS programs and you don't have that already prescribed as one of the softwares on your hardware that you would provision them, you know, on site? So another thing was that hardware, do they have the capability to Zoom? What browser are they using in order to access? So transitioning from being able to ensure that inspectors have the hardware to do they have the software and the amount of capabilities that that computer has is how we transition to a remote process. Next. So now we're going to translate your plan into process, because you're going to take a look at all of your process documents, and you're going to then think how they might need to be modified, or if new ones are not going to need to be created. So you see that this is a circular process graphic to the right here, and you can start anywhere in this process and keep going around and around. So I'm just starting here at identify your processes. And so identify all of those. Your eTMF user access management to get to your trial master file might need to be updated. Maybe you say that access is only provided to inspectors during the business day, and you would not provide them access before late at night or after. Well, you got to get everybody's buy-in that that's what you're going to do. Take a look at your process and see what your limitations you have on there and how they might need to be impacted or changed when you're considering that remote inspection. So once you start listing all of your procedural documents, now you have to review and decide if they get updated. So that's where we go to the right of our circle, which is review, update the as is. So we're analyzing it as is, and you might even go into a design where how it's going to be. You know, you have to think about all the logistics. You have to think about your meeting software. You have to think about how you're going to communicate with an inspector. Previously, it may have been, you know, way of a certain communication path, but now, are you going to allow text? Please say no. Are you going to allow text? What about MS Teams messaging, et cetera, et cetera? You have to start putting all of those things out there to decide before your remote inspection of whether or not that would be allowed for your inspections. Now is not the time for everybody to take a really long time to review and approve. Inspection, if you actually, as your sponsor, think that you can have an inspection at any time, now's the time to hurry up and really get that team going to review and approve these processes. Next. So next we're going to go on to systems, and this is a nice little segue into Paul. Is Paul presenting right next, Karen?
He is, absolutely.
Great. So from a process point of view, because that's where I go to, is I'm looking at all of these system-related supportive processes for an inspector, which is not only do you need support for the sponsor representatives, but you need support for the regulatory authority, the inspector. They might not be able to access your system. They might not have the right, I keep saying browser, but every time you got to think of their browser and are they using the right one? I actually have a help desk ticket in right now, which is my user in Spain cannot see my eTMF because of the browser basic language. And so there's something going on there. So we need to be able to make sure we have the IT support, process and IT. You have to look and see, what if you do need a navigator? How is that going to work, right? Are they going to look at the navigator's eTMF, or are you going to help the inspector go through it themselves? You have to establish that platform and the systems that will not be accessed, because there might be systems that aren't accessed. So what are you going to do in that situation? Like, for example, your learning management system. If you can't narrow it down to an inspector view, well, you should probably already start thinking about how you would provision that and put that as part of the feasibility. Put that right out on there on the table when an inspector calls or writes you and says, okay, how are we going to manage this? This is the content you can have direct access to, and this is the content you can't. And we're going to put it where? Are you going to put it on a SharePoint? Are you going to put it on a box? You have to start now thinking about, what is that acceptable? How do we provide access? Create that room or that location. Okay. And then lastly, make sure that you have a provision for all the inspector accounts for all of the systems and training them on that. You know, inspectors don't want to be trained, but when you aren't accessible in the next room to help them through it, what are those tools that you're going to give to that inspector? Yes, you might be giving, you have a print off, you might have a tip sheet, but you know what? Somebody brought up during the meeting, I think it was actually Paul, which is create them the training video ahead of time, and give them that access to that training so they can review it again if they needed to. And I think, Karen, I think I'm going to end there. These are my thanks and my references, but it's important you see where I was drawing some of this information from. A couple of them are from an FDA inspection as well. There was somebody from the FDA that was given really good information at a recent meeting.
Brilliant. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Karen.
Lisa. Obviously, I'm calling on you again when we come to talk to the questions to the panel, but I'm going to hand over to Paul now. Paul, if you could just walk us through some of the sort of technical requirements for EMA inspections.
Hi, hi everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Perfect, yep.
Okay, great. Yes. So thank you, Lisa. I thought that was really insightful, and definitely this is a very important subject. I've been looking at the EMA guidance that was issued in May, around inspections, and Lisa actually has the reference in the slides there, which is great because I forgot to put it in my slides. And what I did is I just kind of extracted the pieces that directly relate to sort of technology and how they want to conduct remote inspections, what their expectations are. And I wanted to kind of share those things with you and sort of talk a little bit about, you know, some of the things that we need to think about. So the first extract that I took out of the guidance is, as mentioned above, so obviously you need to read the guidance to see the above, inspectors should explore the technical capabilities of the situation setting at the inspectee, as well as the capabilities at their own location agency. Usually there are certain restrictions imposed by the regulatory agency's IT departments on the use of additional software, devices, applications, and access to cloud computing services, as well as file transfer protocols for downloading documents that could affect the planned inspection. So I thought this was quite interesting. They're basically saying, well, we have potentially a lot of firewalls and security and things like that, which mean that it could be quite challenging for the inspector or the inspection team to actually access the resources that you're providing during the remote inspection. So I think that one thing that's really important, and I think Lisa also alluded to this, is make sure that you identify all of the different systems that may be inspected. Remember, the scope of systems is much broader than just eTMF and EDC. And ensure that the inspection team can access them. So maybe, you know, make a list of all the different sources of information that you have that could be relevant to the inspection, and tell them, you know, these are the systems that we have, you know, have you had experience with these systems? And maybe you can even do some test runs with them to make sure that on the day of the inspection they can access properly. And then have a backup plan in case they can't. So, you know, think about, well, how am I going to provide this information if the inspector can't access? And this, I don't think, is necessarily for the eTMF, but it's probably for some of the other sort of more you know, clinical type systems out there. And it may be that you need to prepare some files in advance and load them into your TMF system. Next slide. So the next extract from the guidance, ideally a video streaming system, embedded video conferencing or interactive tools for managing questions, queries and decisions, document sharing or intuitive inspectors viewing tool would facilitate all parties' work and avoid disruptions, overlapping of activities and optimize resources and time invested. A chat/instant messaging platform should also be considered in case of sound interferences. So there's a lot in there, and it's kind of interesting. The things that really sort of stood out to me were the tool, the intuitive inspectors viewing tool that they're talking about, and then also the chat and instant messaging platform in case of sound interferences. But I thought, well, it would probably be quite useful anyway, even if there weren't sound interferences. So I think in relation to this, you need to plan how you'll use the tools to conduct the inspection. And there's a whole bunch of different tools that you need to look at, and do some dry runs, you know, with those tools, and make sure that the inspection team, your internal inspection team on the sponsor side, knows how to use those applications and that they have access to those applications. And then I think longer term, you should work with your vendors to try and integrate these types of communication tools directly into your eTMF system. I think that could be really useful. And then also think about this intuitive inspectors viewing tool, and what that really should be. So next slide. So the third item that I pulled out is around recording. So any recording, audio, video, screenshots during the inspection process should be notified and agreed up front between all involved parties. So that's also interesting. Of course, it would be extremely you know, beneficial to be able to record the whole thing so that we can come back to it, but maybe the inspector's not you know, that comfortable with that. So you need to decide on what needs to be recorded, if anything, with the inspector. Maybe provide some rationale as to why you're recording, and then make sure you've got that agreement. You know, you obviously don't want to have an issue later on where, you know, the inspector wasn't aware that that you were recording them. Next slide. So it is the inspector's expectation to be able to review the eTMF related audit trails, activity logs and metadata in order to reconstruct its management since its deployment. Completeness, quality and timeliness of the retrieval of documents from the TMF are therefore important during a remote inspection. Moreover, inspectors should be enabled to use export, save functions to retrieve documents from the eTMF. This could be provided through a sharing document platform or other media like email or secure system after the applicable QA checks by the document owner or subject matter experts have been performed. So that, again, there's a lot in there. I think what's really important is obviously activity logs and audit trails. That's definitely a hot topic. And so it's really important to make sure that the inspector can easily find and, more importantly, understand the audit trails and activity logs. And so think about maybe being able to attach them to specific artifacts or to specific sites, countries, etc. So it's really easy for them to just pull it up and try and make it as human readable as possible. Sometimes these things can be very techy and not that easy to understand. And you could even go one step further and think about maybe trying to produce timelines with these kinds of things. It's also really important to make sure that the metadata is complete and correct, especially in a remote setting, because they really rely a lot on that metadata to really understand what they're looking for or to find artifacts. And then finally, they want to be able to download and save records, which sounds a little scary, but we have to give them that ability. And so one recommendation would be to keep a log of what they're actually downloading, so you know exactly what they're looking at and what they have. Next slide. So it's recommended to use an electronic document request form that could be shared among the inspectee and the inspection team. The inspection team may request the inspectee to keep track of all requests and provide a regular update of the electronic document created. So this, again, I thought was kind of quite forward thinking, and obviously it definitely sort of mimics the request form or the request log that we typically see in an on-premise inspection. And so absolutely we should try and implement this in electronic form. Ideally, it should be available directly in your eTMF application, but not all applications may have that capability. And so if they don't, then you should definitely work with your vendors to improve and integrate that into your eTMF application if it's not available. And then maybe also link content in your TMF plan to the various different groups who would have that content, so that you can really direct those forms to the right people and very quickly retrieve the information that the inspector wants. Next slide. So it's important that sponsors/CROs provide remote technical support for inspectors, and Lisa alluded to that really is very important and shouldn't really be an issue. That the eTMF is robust and capable to support a remote inspection, even if the eTMF is decentralized and managed from different locations and its content spread across different systems. It's important that inspectors can still gain access to or via a centralized system with one or several connected systems. So this is quite, I would say, quite a challenge in today's environment, because a lot of the systems that may have TMF relevant content are not necessarily connected together. And so I think, as we start to move forward into the realm of remote inspections, you should definitely be working with your vendors to find ways of being able to link all of those other systems together. And maybe think about things like single sign-on for authentication to make it easier for the inspector to be able to access the information directly within each of the different systems. And then I think in the future, as an industry, we should look to build more federated systems, and maybe this inspector viewing tool that they're referring to make it easier to find stuff across all TMF repositories. Next slide. I think I may have got to the end. I did. So I definitely recommend that everybody, go in and have a look at this guidance. It's 5 pages long. It's not very long, but it's very, very practical and quite specific in terms of what they're looking for. And I think it gives you a really good basis to start to plan your remote inspection. And with that, I will pass it back to Karen. Thank you. Karen, are you there?
Yeah. Sorry, I pressed on
Okay.
mute and I obviously then
Okay.
pressed it again. I'm here. Sorry, talking to myself.
I just noticed that Dawn just put a note, and it makes a lot of sense. Inspectors will take copies of documents in a paper world, so as long as you can keep track of what they're downloading, this is really not any different. I agree, absolutely.
No, absolutely agree. So what I'd like to do now is actually have a little bit of a panel discussion. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask the people who said they were going to be on the panel to, I'm going to stop sharing my computer, and I'm going to put on my video too. And I hope you like the fact that I've got TMF reference model turns 10. What you guys can do if you want
fancy.
to is you can click on gallery view, and then you get, the problem with gallery view is you actually then see everybody, or you can just have one person big in the middle. So we've got Paul, we've got Donna, we've got Sholay. Lisa, I'm hoping you might be able to come on camera as well. Attila, you're welcome to come on camera if you want to. We were just going to have the people doing the panel at the moment being on camera, but so it's not a problem. But anybody who wants to speak out. Lisa, are you available for the panel?
I'm here now. Yes, I am.
Excellent. And Wendy, I
wasn't planning on being on video though, so I'll take a quick look and then I might turn it off.
That's absolutely no problem whatsoever. No problem whatsoever. Hi. And I don't know, Wendy, Wendy, you said you had a clash and you might not be able to, but I did see you speak earlier, so I don't know whether you are around or whether you've gone, actually. You may have moved.
I'm here.
Oh, fantastic. So I know you said you'd had some experience as well, so if you can be part of the panel, that'd be fantastic.
Sure.
So essentially what we're trying to do here is actually give people the opportunity to ask questions, to share. So if anybody wants to share, if they wouldn't mind, they can either put the comments in the chat, or they can just speak up, or they can come on camera and talk to us, because it's always nice to see that we're all real people. And so, it's very relaxed from that perspective. What I did to sort of prepare for this panel was I actually asked people to contribute, to give comments, etc., and to ask questions. So I've got a mixture of comments and questions. I wanted to start with a comment that I got from a gentleman called Andy Lawton, who works in risk management as a consultant. And it goes back, Dawn, to your point completely, which is that having a virtual inspection doesn't change the basics of what we're trying to do. Just because everything is remote, it doesn't mean that, there's still going to be different ways. The EMA and the MHRA is still going to be system focused, PMDA is still going to be study focused. And actually, as you said, Lisa, the MHRA and EMA, they've been doing virtual inspections for a while. So it's not new. It's not something that's changed. I think obviously the pandemic has changed quite a lot. So what I thought I'd do, I'm going to start off by asking a question, and then I'm going to intersect with people's comments and things. And as I said, if anybody wants to comment, ask a question, stick it in the chat. So the first question I have is, has anyone experienced a remote inspection where the TMF was moved out of the eTMF and archived? So in other words, it wasn't in your live eTMF system, but it's been put into an archive system, and then you've had to do a remote inspection on it. I'm judging by the shaking of heads that nobody has.
No.
And that's actually quite interesting, because that goes, I think in my mind, that goes back to what's happened over, with people leaving things active in systems and maybe locking down access, but actually leaving them active within the systems.
So, Karen, the only thing I would, from a process point of view, is that if that has happened to you, you have to really make sure you put the process in place to provide evidence of everything that was in, in the TMF or in that repository, and that it's been transferred and QC'd to make sure it's complete. I think what is important is that somebody doesn't see that it was incomplete and you have that disjointed worry, right? And two, that maybe you're not providing everything that the inspector would need. So if that would be my situation, I would ensure that we had a very clear file transfer protocol to a secure site and to make sure that the content was completely transferred. And I provided that evidence of quality of transfer to the inspector so they knew.
Okay. I'm sorry, Paul. Yeah.
No, I was just going to say, the other challenge is if you've transferred something to an archive, sometimes the audit trail may just be sort of a download in an Excel file or something like that. You may have lost some of the traceability there, or not necessarily lost it, but you're going to have a hard time reconstructing that traceability. And I think that they still expect to see it. Especially if it's an older study, it may not be so easy because the systems weren't necessarily logging things to the amount of detail that they expect to see today. So I definitely think that's a challenge. And then the second point, one of the use cases that we've been thinking about with the exchange mechanism is archiving. So being able to use the exchange mechanism as a way of archiving all of the metadata and the audit trail and everything else with a clear link and reference to each of the artifacts. And then hopefully as systems start to adopt the standard, it will be a lot easier just to load everything back into a system so that the inspector can then easily navigate through that TMF with all of the metadata and the audit trail and the activity log.
And I think this goes back to another question that a person asked, which was around if the documents have been taken out and you can't give the inspector access to the archive, which might be a possibility. How, has anyone had experience of like effectively pulling it back? And if we can use the exchange mechanism as a mechanism to be able to move things out and then back into the system so that you can use the system to get the functionality, including the audit trail, I think that will make a big difference. And I think the other thing that I've seen, and I don't know whether Donna or Shola, you have any comments on this as well, is that people are putting in processes to take a risk-based view on when they actually do an archive. Because the challenge is, I think, people say, well, we're going to have to archive for 20, 30 years. Keeping it in a live system for 20, 30 years. And I know I've had lots of conversations with Eldon, who a lot of you will know around archiving and define archiving and what does it actually mean. And you've got to have it and make sure it's in the format that it was originally in, et cetera, et cetera. I think people need to have a very strong process as to, I've taken a view to put this into an archive. Why am I doing it? What's the risk associated with that? And, what do I have to do, as you say, Lisa, to actually be able to present it back at the end of the day? Shola or Donna, any comments to make on the sort of archiving side? Because it's clearly a question that has bugged a couple of people.
Yeah, I could. Go ahead, Shola.
Sorry, Donna. I was just going to say really quickly, thinking about a virtual inspection versus a face-to-face inspection, really the principles are the same. It's just the format that's changed. So, I mean, if you think about a face-to-face inspection and what's expected, what's going to be asked of you, et cetera, versus virtual, I mean, it's pretty much the same. What the differences are the technology, the format that you're presenting the information, et cetera. So,
Shola, can I just say that
the virtual inspection and archive but have with face-to-face. And the one thing I want to say about archive is if you're calling it an
Yeah, Sholay, you seem to have gone down a tunnel.
Sorry.
And it's okay. You went down the tunnel and underwater at the same time. So, which was rather entertaining, but still.
Okay, I just stopped my video. Hopefully that helps.
It doesn't at the moment. So what I'm going to do, Sholay, if you don't mind, I'm going to ask Donna to speak, and then I don't know whether maybe you've got a phone.
I'm going to change my audio.
Yeah. And let Donna talk while you change your audio, and then we'll come back to you if that's okay.
Yeah, hi, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you're fine. You're good.
Okay, all right, awesome. Okay, so I really just wanted to add the comment that, like anything else, when you're planning for your inspection, you want to take a risk-based approach there as well, right? If you know that you have TMFs that are archived, we recommend planning for that on the front end and making sure that you do your assessment. I know sometimes people think, oh, well, that study won't be, it won't be impacted, but I had a situation just recently where it was impacted. Because of the strategy for the filing changed a little bit at the last minute, we ended up needing to go back to the early development studies, and they weren't as prepared for that as they were for their later phase, what they thought was going to be their pivotal studies. So that when you're thinking inspection strategy, just take the risk-based approach again, right? What's the risk of needing that? You're better off pulling it forward and having it ready to go than having to pull it out of an archive and risk that you don't have your metadata, that maybe you don't have completeness, you don't even know where all your content is. So I think that's just the comment I would add.
Yeah, Charles made an interesting comment about the fact that they'll be looking for an audit trail or history from the day it was archived to the day it was retrieved. So it's not just about what happened in the system, but actually what happens once you've sent it off to archive and then you've retrieved it from the archive.
Right.
So
and get all that ready.
Yeah, it absolutely ties it in. One of the other questions that came in, which I thought was quite interesting, is has anybody had a remote inspection where they've had the TMF has been paper? And I mean, that's a slightly weird situation, because if it's remote and it's paper, you sort of have to either go to another TMF or you have to wait. Anyone had that situation?
So me personally, I haven't, but I've read about it in part of my research.
Okay.
And one of the things that you have to start planning for right now is start scanning. Right, is that if it's going to be remote, then you have to identify most likely, and start scanning at a risk-based approach. Yes, I'm going to have monitoring visits. Yes, I'm going to have this. And yes, I'm going to have this. And then start working with the inspectors as to actually the format. And then what would they like, you to prepare ahead of time. And then what you could prepare as needed. So we don't want you to start scanning a 10,000, 25,000 million piece of paper TMF, but this is where you're coordinating and collaborating with the inspectors on those big documents, on those important documents right now.
So interesting. Hi, Shirley. I can see you're back now. I was going to say,
hello.
Rebecca, I don't know where you are, Rebecca, whether you can, but you said, can you talk about your experience with exactly this situation, wherever you may be?
Yeah, sure. I'll try to pop my video on. I'm not sure if it's coming up.
I can see your name. I can't see your video yet, but it doesn't matter. If you can, great. If you
Yeah.
can't, don't worry.
Yeah, so we recently had a Health Canada inspection, and one of the studies that they initially selected was a paper study, and we got back to them with the different formats of the studies, and they actually just backed away from it and decided to choose an electronic study because they were entirely remote. They did not come on site to our Canadian office, and they felt that selecting a different study would make things run a little smoother.
So that was Health Canada. So I'm guessing they were doing more of a system inspection than an actual study inspection then. Like they were looking end-to-end process and systems, because if they were looking at a specific study, I would have guessed they would have been in the situation that Lisa's talking about, where they want to look at the data.
Correct. It was sort of a hybrid of both, because they did dig into the data for some of the studies, but they also were very interested in just how we manage our TMF system and how documents were filed and things of that nature. So it was a bit of a hybrid of both.
Okay, cool. Okay, well, interesting. Okay, Sholay, I'm really sorry. I'm not really sorry. I'm delighted I'm sorry you have problems. I'm delighted that you're back. So I don't know whether it's going to make sense for you to make your comment now, but whatever you were going to say, go for it. Because you
Yeah, no, I think we've moved on, so it's totally fine. And sorry about that.
No worries at all. Hey, listen, we all have these challenges. I mean, you know, this is the family space. So, you know, we've all got these challenges, and you just hope when people are less forgiving that it doesn't happen. So that's no problem at all.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask a question about remote inspections and sites. Does anyone have any experience of site remote inspections, and what happened? Did they have problems with the training, the IT, the setup, etc.? So I don't know whether anybody's had any experience of that. Lisa, Sholay, Paul, Donna?
I haven't, no.
Not yet.
No, in fact, I know FDA right now is doing on-site inspections. They are not doing.
Mhm.
I'm not aware of any virtual, but I am aware of 3 site inspections that have happened in the last 5 weeks.
Yeah, that's been my experience too, is on-site for FDA, and they made an announcement, I think in July, saying that they were going to do on-site inspections.
Yes.
Anybody on the call have experience of site remote inspections?
This is Rebecca again. We have also had the FDA grace our presence during this time.
You're busy, Rebecca.
Believe it or not. And they, you know, to y'all's point, they did do on-site. I don't have a ton of details about what they did with the site inspections, but they also came into our office on site. But they were very accommodating in terms of COVID requirements, and they did not require everybody to come into the office. We just had one liaison and then appropriate folks as needed. And then they followed up with their site inspections on site.
Rebecca, are you US or did I hear you say you're in Canada?
I am actually US based, but we had a Health Canada inspection as well.
Okay, so this was, you had the Health Canada, but FDA came on site in US.
Correct. Yes, to our
Okay.
Cambridge office.
I was wondering. I thought, Canada? Thank you.
Yes.
Thanks, Rebecca. There was a question that's come in from Shunak saying, some sponsors are shuffling across eTMF systems and losing real-time track of audit trails, though available in export. Has anyone experienced inspections for such studies? So I guess this is, you're in one system, you've then gone and you've put in a new system, you've migrated your documents over, and maybe the audit trail's been exported. And has anyone had experience of those systems where TMFs have been gone from one system to another effectively?
Well, I mean, I think it happens quite a lot, right? But I think that I would say that most organizations today are savvy to the requirement of making sure that the audit trail comes over with the electronic records, because otherwise they wouldn't be compliant anymore, right? So I think most of the experience, in fact, all of the experiences I've had, they've always had those records with the the actual artifacts.
So I think it's interesting because I've seen, I think a few years ago, there was a lot of TMF transfers from CROs to sponsors. And when that was happening, often the audit trail either wasn't, to start off with, the audit trails just weren't coming over full stop. And then after that, they were coming over generally as something relatively flat, relatively not something that you could go in and really interrogate very easily. And I know I've seen those sort of studies being inspected where people have gone in and said, well, show me the audit trail, and then you have to try and figure it out from an audit trail that might be a 5,000-page PDF, which is all they've ever had.
Or otherwise you have an audit trail with all of the documents created on the same day when they were imported.
Yes,
it's
absolutely.
tricky. It's very tricky to recreate an audit trail from another system in a receiving system.
So what the question has just come across the format of the transferred audit trail. So and that's actually a very interesting challenge. I know you've been talking about it Paul, sorry, I've just seen another message. I'm going to just have a look at it. Can you just talk about the format of the audit trail and the different options?
Yeah, I mean, well, obviously you've got the classic Part 11, Annex 11 audit trail, you know, creation, modification, deletion. But nowadays you've also got all of the traceability around the TMF processes, you know, who reviewed the documents, who approved them, who saw them in the case of blinded documents. So all of that stuff, today there isn't really a prescribed format, but again, you know, coming back to the exchange mechanism, in the exchange mechanism we've defined a format, and that format is based primarily on the CDISC standard. But I think in general, it's important, you know, there's a sender of information and a receiver, and both parties need to agree that format, and it needs to be documented in a transfer document. And then I think there also needs to be a migration plan, which describes how are you going to take that format and then integrate it into the receiving system to make sure that you don't lose that traceability and that you can still pull up the audit trail and that the dates are correct, right? The original dates, not the dates that you imported the content into the receiving system. And I think it's definitely a challenge, but I think as you know, more and more organizations start to adopt the exchange mechanism, hopefully that kind of problem will start to go away. But we need to adopt, right? So
Go exchange mechanism. And can I just say, Laurie, Laurie messaged me about how to get it so it's just the speakers on the screen. So thank you, Laurie. That's brilliant. It's much better than seeing hundreds of little boxes. I wanted to just bring up an example that somebody sent in, which I thought was quite interesting. Anyone done any PMDA remote inspections? No. So there's a lady who wrote in who's an archivist working for a CRO in Japan, and they experienced a remote inspection by the PMDA, and they required all the documents to be presented, and they did it in 2 rounds. They verified the documents uploaded to the cloud system, and then they did online interviews after that. And the archivist had to go and digitize a lot of documents. To your point, Lisa, exactly, they had to scan and index all the documents, and then they did these online interviews to try and sort of tie the 2 things together. The remote GCP inspections are going to carry on to the end of March 2021 in Japan. So I thought that was quite interesting. Harsha made a comment about when the TMF is transferred from CRO to clients, they had lots of questions about how the CRO managed their studies. So I totally understand that experience. There was a couple of other comments that were made, and this was around mock inspections and the value of mock inspections. And Donna, I know you've done quite a lot of mock virtuals. Could you give a little bit of a discussion around what your experience has been? And I'll add in, I've got somebody from Ireland who sent me some comments, so I'll add in anything you don't say effectively.
Sure. So I actually just finished up a mock virtual inspection, which I think the real value was the opportunity to fail. Normally what I love about a mock inspection rate is, and I tell people, go in with your expectations that you test out the things that you may think may or may not work, right? So if you've got an issue and you want to say it one way, but you're not really sure, that's the time to test it out, right? So I love mock inspections because it gives us a chance to test out what we think we want to say, to kind of push the system. In the case of the mock virtual inspection, we were able to test out the process as well. And some of the processes worked really well and some of them did not. One of the ones that did not work really well is to just have a place where we put the documents for the mock inspector to look at. The problem was that what we put there wasn't necessarily fully answering what he was looking for. And when you're in the middle of an inspection and things are asked for, not all the 1572s or not all the financial disclosures, but what I call like true inspection documents that are answering questions, that are being used to respond to things, we didn't give the mock inspector a chance to look at them with us present, right? So we just put them there. There was a time zone issue and we were trying to save time. And so he looked at them overnight. But the problem was he looked at it, it didn't answer his question, and he never came back. Well, it was posted there with the intent to have follow-up discussion. And so what we've decided to do going forward is we're going to do an end of day follow, just a discussion point of everything that's been added, and then during the day, and then a startup discussion in the morning of everything that was added overnight, showing all of those unusual documents. In this particular case, it was a list of documents that were available, and we wanted the inspector to identify, what it was exactly they were looking for. And so it's in the case of a mock, when it's just your routine in-person inspection, there's tons of value in terms of practicing and finding out where your weak spots are. I think it's an added layer, and it's almost a must-do in preparation for a virtual mock, because it really does help you figure out what parts of your systems are going to work and what parts aren't. So while I'm a fan of mocks, I'm sorry.
Sorry, Karen.
Well, I'm a fan of mocks, but I feel like to try and plan for a virtual inspection and not do a mock is just really not going to be successful. There's so much.
So what's interesting there is I've got this experience from Nolene, who did it at Ireland, who did exactly the same thing, mock inspection, exactly the same comment you made about having some sort of system for providing the documents, and a numbering system and a control system for what are you going to give them, how are you going to tag, all that sort of, tag documents or identify documents that are being provided. She also said dry runs, so definitely do dry runs. Question for you, Donna, and I know we're running out of time, and so we may even end up doing something like this again, because I think this is, I'm assuming people are enjoying this. Well, I hope they are. I am. Did you do a mock site at all, or just sponsor?
Well, it's funny you should say that. We are doing one today. We're doing a mock site. We're doing two. We're doing a virtual mock site and an in-person. We had planned on doing this one particular site virtual, but the FDA is there today. So we're planning on our part, right? We kind of missed the timeline. But yes, definitely plan virtual for site. I think right now FDA is doing them all in person. I haven't heard of a single one, but it's really a challenge for the site. And we had this discussion because we wanted to look at the ISF. How can we look at the ISF if it's paper, right? To scan it was going to be thousands of pages at this point. The study went on for a couple of years. So if you think you're going to have site, I would strongly encourage it, right? And have those same technology processes in place.
Fantastic. There's a couple of good comments. So Rebecca, thank you very much. Rebecca's put a whole comment, and I'm not going to read it. If everybody wants to go and look at the chat around some technology stuff that they did from their Health Canada inspection. And I know there's another question around RPA and automations, which I'm probably going to have to look at putting a panel, have a further discussion at a later time, because we are going to run out of time, and there's always way too much to discuss on inspections and
things. Hey, Karen.
Yes?
I'm going to take 10 seconds. I think the value also of the mock inspections is to prepare people for the interviews, because you have to be really careful. You prepare people for in-person, but when somebody is silent in a Zoom call, it's even more uncomfortable. And you don't want to fill that space, and you want to get people comfortable with how they're going to say something and how to be succinct instead of just kind of babbling on. And we know that anyway, but that's a different challenge for remote that should be practiced and critically reviewed. That's where you can take your mock inspection, record it, and then go through with each of those people improvements they could make.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. Just as a quick comment, so there's, Jane's mentioned that she's tried to find out whether anyone's doing remote site inspections. So it sounds to me like the FDA, people are not doing as many remote site inspections, but there's definitely some experience. What I'm going to say, guys, is that I am going to just go back to this one very quickly, is just to say that unfortunately, we are running out of time, have run out of time, I think is probably a better way of putting it. I would love to have some comments and thoughts on this sort of a format. So if you like this sort of a format, as opposed to just an educational format, put it in the chat. I will add the comments from the chat to the slides, plus the polls. And there's one last thought I want to leave you with, which is I asked Andy Fisher, if there was going to be any changes post-Brexit to inspections, and he basically said there's not going to be any changes, but there may be, the only change relates to the involvement of the EMA requested inspection for centralized licensing. So leaving you with that thought, we will circulate the slides and we will put them up on the website, and the next meeting is the 26th of October. Give me some thoughts, give me some comments, and panel, thank you so much. Sorry that it was a little bit haphazard, but it was great to have you all on there, and everyone stay safe, stay well, and we will speak to you next time.
Thanks, everybody.
You. Thanks,
Take care.
Karen. Thanks,
Bye,
guys.
all.
Thanks,
Bye.
Karen. Take care,
Bye.
everybody. Good to see everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Karen.